So Naomi, why don't you get us started this evening?
Yes, happy to do that. Good evening, everyone. I am Naomi Chen, the co-lead of the Silicon Valley North. Let me just stop screen sharing. Okay, perfect. I am the co-lead of the Silicon Valley North chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby, and I'm also a senior at the Nueva School. I am so excited to be here this evening. I joined Citizens Climate Lobby because I felt the urgency to take action on the climate now, and I wanted to be heard. Citizen Climate Lobby's mission is to bring everyone, regardless of different backgrounds and political beliefs, together through a relationship-driven and solution-focused approach to climate change. Tonight will be our second night experiencing the magic of citizens' climate lobbies and our sponsors as we talk to our candidates and share mutual concerns for the future of our planet and our local communities. I will once again highlight how Representative Anna Eshoo has spearheaded multiple climate policies on everything from natural disaster impacts to ecosystem conservation and energy and transportation. That means we have big shoes to fill. To our wonderful candidates, thank you so much for being here and being ready to listen and answer some of our questions. We hope you can share some specific policy agendas or action items towards finding climate solutions. And lastly, but definitely not least, thank you again to our sponsors, 350 Silicon Valley, Thrive Alliance, Sustainable San Mateo County, Actera, Greentown Los Altos, and Sustainable Silicon Valley. Thank you for your continued support. Tonight wouldn't be possible without you. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Neela Patel, our moderator for this evening. Dr. Patel is a chief business officer at a biotech startup. She has also been a lifelong activist for social justice and for the environment.
Thank you so much, Naomi. There we go. You'd think after 5 years on Zoom, we'd all know. But thank you for getting us started and to the candidates for being here this evening. I know for some of you that meant doing some heroics in terms of power and internet. So we're really grateful that you were all able to make it. And audience members, so great to have you join us to get educated about the candidates' positions on the climate. I'd like to have a special shout out to Madeline Freeman, Jen Bulka, and a very committed group of volunteers working behind the scenes, especially on the technical aspect, which today was very complicated. Some of the people behind the scenes don't have power and they are being hosted at other folks' house this evening. Special call out to Elaine Salinger for her dedicated leadership on the climate. I'm Dr. Neela Patel. I'm a scientist and a member of San Mateo CCL's Grasstops group. This is a task force within CCL which works with community leaders to advocate for immediate and meaningful impact and meaningful action on climate. As you all know, we have 10 candidates running in this primary. We will hear from 5 of them this evening. Last Thursday, you heard from 4 of them at the forum, which was recorded, and it will be made available to anyone who registered for one or both of the forums. Tonight's session is also being recorded, and the link will be sent to all who registered. Chat is disabled. There's no technical malfunction with that. We did that so that everyone could focus on the responses from our candidates. Tonight's format: opening statements of 1 minute from each candidate, followed by a series of questions. Candidates will have 1 minute to respond with a 10-second warning, and microphones will be silenced at the 1 minute mark. Candidates, there won't be any follow-up questions from me, so please use your time wisely and respond directly to the question. We'll rotate which candidate answers first in alphabetical order of first name. Audience members, thanks for listening carefully. Please ask your questions related to climate in the Q&A box. And I would ask also that you keep those focused at the federal level. I also am up in arms about NEM3, but there's not a lot that Congress is going to be able to do. That is a state level issue. We do understand how interconnected all issues are, so we will be generous in our interpretation of which questions are relevant, and we will draw from your questions in the second half of our forum. I'm excited to get started, so let's begin with 1-minute opening statements. The order in which we'll go is Ahmed Mostafa, Peter Dixon, Peter Ohtaki, Rishi Kumar, and Sam Liccardo. So Ahmed, could you please start us off with your opening statement?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Ahmed Mostafa, and I'm running for Congress to ensure that the voices of those who have been silenced and sidelined echo in the halls of Congress. I'd like to start with a short personal story. A few years ago, my grandfather came to visit me from Egypt. I'm the child of immigrants, and he didn't qualify for the travel insurance. He was on my bed presenting with stroke-like symptoms, and we rushed him to the hospital. At which point he regained consciousness, and the hospital staff told us that his heart was beating at 23 beats per minute and that he needed a pacemaker stat. My grandfather responded, "How much is this going to cost?" And they said $300,000. And he said, "Absolutely not." We were able to get him the care that he needed, but that question, when he responded no, made me think how many people end up walking out of that hospital. And so I'm running for Congress to ensure that those who have been silenced and sidelined always have the dignity that they deserve.
Thank you. Let's now go to Peter D. Peter, you're also silenced. You're muted.
Thank you for having me to Citizens Climate Lobby. It's wonderful to be here and to be with folks who are lifelong environmentalists. I'm also a lifelong environmentalist. As a kid, I participated in this group called Lighthawk. It's one of my earliest sort of memories from elementary school that would fly planes in South America to get local officials up so they could see the environmental and rainforest devastation that was occurring in their countries. It came full circle years later when I was in Hillary Clinton's State Department, and we were using satellite imagery and change detection to look at the rainforest devastation in Borneo. So I'm very proud of my track record here, like I think everyone is. But I'm very concerned that in the next 6 years, we have to mitigate the worst outcomes of climate change. And so here's the thing that I would ask all the candidates that the moderators can't. Let's not read prepared statements. Let's just have an honest conversation that highlights our backgrounds here.
Thank you so much. Peter O, we'll turn to you now.
Okay, can you hear me? I'm off of mute. All right, great. I'm Peter Ohtaki. I'm running because I'm fed up that Congress is broken. It's so polarized that each party is obsessed with making the other party look bad rather than to solve the major issues facing our nation. And so I'm working hard to come up with bipartisan solutions. And so let me tell you about my personal climate journey. When I was on the Menlo Park City Council, I was very proud to have supported Peninsula Clean Energy, which now brings over 85%, 90% renewable power as part of our electricity. I know Santa Clara County has a very similar similar structure. Another area that I'm very proud about is the work that we did to rezone a big portion net zero. That's it. Well,
Thank you.
sorry.
We'll now turn to Rishi.
I got to watch the clock. Sorry.
Rishi, you're on.
Can we reset the clock? I didn't quite hear that.
Yep, no problem. Could we reset the clock, please, to 1 minute? Thank you so much. There we go.
Okay, great. Good evening. My name's Rishi Kumar, and thank you to Citizens Climate Lobby. My climate position is at rishikumar.com/priorities. That includes fighting climate challenge with technology, such as carbon capture devices. I was honored to receive a historic 42% of the vote about a year ago, and I'm back to win. I'm the only candidate in this race who rejects all PAC money and money from big oil, big pharma. We have spent 1.4 million in this race in outreach, every dollar coming from people. Climate action is my urgent agenda. I was against the Keystone Pipeline. I stood with the Standing Rock Sioux tribe in their opposition to the Dakota Pipeline.
10
I
seconds.
publicly opposed Biden's approval of oil drilling in Alaska, and I have pushed back on California's sabotage of rooftop solar. Not a career politician.
Thank you so much. So we're now going to start with the questions. The first question.
Sorry, I don't think I had an opportunity to speak yet.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Sam. I am so
No problem.
hard face. Let's go.
There's a lot of us.
I have you on my list.
No, thank you. Hey, I'm just thrilled to be part of this. I really want to thank Citizens Climate Lobby and all the partner environmental organizations. And since Naomi introduced us, we should give a big bow to the young people who've been part of the Silicon Valley North Youth Chapter, because I know there's a big, big victory that was won with a very hard pause that was hit on the LNG facility as a result of all the great pressure that was led by young people throughout our country. So very grateful for their work. I'm very proud of my record, obviously, as mayor of City San Jose. You can see my agenda on my website, samliccardo.com. But specifically, we have succeeded because elected officials have worked in partnership with great environmental organizations, people young and old, to make San Jose the largest city in the country, to launch a clean energy. I'm sorry. Oh, a clean energy. Okay. Oh, thank you. Yes, to launch a CCA, which is now providing 95% GHG-free electricity to all of its residents.
Thank you. And Sam, I promise you will be called on in order next time without pause. So thank you. So we'll start with our questions. The first question, I think we can all appreciate. What policies would you sponsor to help the people of the district and of the country as a whole adapt to the effects of a changing climate? I'm going to put stronger winter storms as a perfect example, but also we know what it's like to have more intense wildfires. We've all encountered the smoke in this area, hotter summers, rising sea levels, which also impact this area. So this time we will start with you, Peter D.
Thank you. I really appreciate this question, because I feel like so often we talk about how to mitigate the worst outcomes of climate change without, frankly, a fair recognition that a lot of those worst outcomes are already here. And even if we stopped polluting tomorrow, we would already be facing a pretty uncertain future with once in 100-year wildfires or floods or storms every 3 years. And so what I would like to see here is a national service opportunity be greatly expanded, specifically in taking the Army Corps of Engineers from about 30,000 people to about 300,000 people. Those are the folks that build all our berms to deal with flooding, and to dramatically expand the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration from about 6,000 people to about 600,000 people. That's our climate force. Young people are wanting a role to secure their own future. This would give them a way to be a stakeholder in that future.
Thank you. We'll now turn to Peter O.
So my number one priority at the federal level would be to encourage renewable sources of energy on our power grid. We still, even in California statewide, 40% of our electricity is still natural gas power plants. Nationally, it's close to 60%, and that includes coal as well. And so we've got to convert our grid over to fully renewable sources. One of my very good friends who used to be CEO of Actera is running a offshore wind power company, which I think has great promise to create clean, renewable energy. We need to create incentives to encourage not only consumers, but others such as, for example, truck drivers to convert to EV trucks because they use a big part of gas.
Thank you. We'll now turn to you, Rishi.
Yes, so my focus would be on the decarbonization of the economy. We have to replace carbon-based fuels with non-carbon-based fuels. And that's the first imperative to halting the greenhouse gases. But that is not enough. We need to explore aggressive options like, we have been burning fossil fuels, deforestation, 317 ppm in 1955 to 412 today. And we are heading to a point of no return. So we should consider direct air capture systems that will operate at efficiencies such as carbon capture devices. And it actually outpaces trees. We cannot rely upon just planting trees. The situation is dire. And I would like to say this, that unfortunately, with the challenges of a full-time job, I have some urgent commitments and I will need to drop off from this forum. My apologies. I would have loved to stay. Visit rishikumar.com for details on my policy. Thank you all. Bye for now. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Sam, we'll now turn to you.
Thank you. Well, with regard to adaptation locally, certainly a big concern is around sea level rise. And we've got more than $50 billion are allocated, or at least authorized through the IRA, and we need appropriated for critical projects, particularly for natural adaptations. For example, wetlands restoration here in the Bay. Think about the shoreline plan. So we think about the restoration of the South Bay salt ponds. These are opportunities for us to become more resilient and adapt in natural pathways. So we need to advocate heartily to bring those dollars home. And I've certainly demonstrated as mayor of San Jose the ability to advocate well in DC to bring dollars home for major transit projects, for example, throughout the region. Secondly, I think as we think nationally, it's critical for us to empower homeowners and apartment owners to be able to finance the adaptations they're going to need through a federally backed financing program that I proposed in my book, which is online at samliccardo.com. Federally backed PACE financing, for example, can enable folks to replace.
Thank you. So our second question this evening.
Wait,
Ahmed, yes.
I haven't gone yet.
I will get this right eventually. You're still muted, Ahmed.
Okay.
There we go.
Can I just reset? Because
Yes.
I didn't know when to start.
There we go.
Okay. Yeah, so we need to implement the Green New Deal framework to address the climate crisis in a manner to transition us in a way to address equity for every community. Climate justice is not just a climate issue, it is a societal justice issue. It disproportionately affects our most marginalized communities, and it's not something that is a 2050 problem, a 2040 problem, or a 2030 problem. It's something that we must address today. So in Congress, I'll fight to pass legislation like Cori Bush's Green New Deal for Cities, which takes an intersectional lens to climate change and gives funding to local communities to address climate change and build infrastructure in manners that the local experts can figure out themselves. For example, if it's on the coast, we can resolve the erosion issues on our coast. If it's in the valley, we can work to resolve the drought issues as well.
Thank you so much. So now we'll get to our second question. In the United States, achieving the 2030 CO2 emission reduction goals may pose challenges, particularly in the short term, due to insufficient manufacturing capacity and resources. Simultaneously, China has overcapacity in manufacturing for wind turbines, solar panels, and batteries, and could export those critical items. Imposing tariffs on those Chinese-produced goods protects domestic manufacturing, but such measures may lead to an increase in the overall cost of electrification. What are your thoughts on potential solutions or alternative strategies to navigate this complex situation? Peter O, we'll begin with you.
All right, thank you. Absolutely, we've got to, as I mentioned in my prior answer, we've got to get our grid to have more renewable sources of energy as quickly as possible. So what that means is, particularly when it comes to China, to the extent that if there is overcapacity there, I'm not, I oppose any trade barriers that would prevent being able to utilize that. Having said that, I think there's a great opportunity domestically to be able to encourage, for example, solid state battery production, as we're going to see this conversion from lithium ion to solid state. There's an opportunity for domestic manufacturers, as I mentioned, offshore wind power. All of that is domestic sources.
Thank you, Peter. We'll now turn to Sam. Sam, there you go.
Thank you. Well, certainly the IRA gives us opportunities to deploy billions of dollars to really ramp up domestic manufacturing in key strategic areas to enable clean energy economy to grow here. But I think it's important to keep in mind there are more than 2 countries that can do manufacturing in this world. And we have many partners in Latin America and Europe and Asia and elsewhere that should be part of the green revolution. So we don't need to merely succumb to those countries that are engaged in anti-competitive trading practices that are really subverting the global ability to compete fairly in these areas. We can invest in our own and engage with many, many other trading partners throughout the world, and we should certainly support that. Secondly, I think we critically need more innovation in this space, particularly as we look at mineral shortages, for example, and the scarce minerals that are needed for battery technology and PVs, and that's going to take research.
Thank you so much. Ahmed, we'll turn to you now.
Yeah, we need to invest in our own communities and our own cities. It's time for us to build upon the historic investments in sustainable jobs that we've done with the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act to create more strong paying competitive jobs in clean energy, create and build more climate resilient infrastructure, and increase our capacity for manufacturing. So it's really simple at the end of the day. Let's build in our own cities. Let's build in our own communities, and let's invest in ourselves.
Thank you so much. Peter D, over to you.
Yeah, let's remember history here. 15 years ago, the private sector put billions into clean energy. And the Chinese Communist Party said, look, we'll build it for you. Come put your factories here. They then built the same factory across town to steal all the IP. And then they hacked all the American companies to understand what their pricing schedule was so that they could use Chinese Communist Party state funds to enable their companies to underbid. And so they crushed 15 years ago all of those investments. And that's how they built the capacity that they have today. So to go back and forget that history and invite them back into the hen house just makes absolutely no sense. Yes, we should be reshoring. Yes, we should be doing that with our allies. That's the way to do it. And the way to do that is to leverage the IRA, not open the door to China, which is using slave labor to do a lot of this. Let's not forget.
Thank you so much, Peter. So just a reminder to audience members, please go ahead and place your questions in the Q&A box on your screen, and we will get to those questions. Here we are with our third question. An economy-wide price on carbon could help reduce America's carbon pollution by 50% by 2030, letting the market choose the most cost-effective approach to reducing emissions. Do you support putting a price on carbon? And if not, what approach do you propose to significantly reduce our emissions by 2030? Sam, we'll lead with you this time.
Thank you. I want to thank the Citizens Climate Lobby for your longstanding advocacy for a carbon fee and dividend, which is actually one of the lead proposals in my environmental agenda on my website, samliccardo.com. I think it's critical that we have a price on carbon so that we can incentivize people to properly consume and invest. And it's critical that those dollars come back to taxpayers and consumers who are obviously going to be paying for them ultimately. So it's a critical element. Obviously, we need a border adjustment included as well, so that we're not disadvantaged in our international trade. And obviously, this is going to take a lot of work to get there. There's some hopeful signs that there's Republican support, for example, in places like Utah, where we're seeing a lot of elected officials understanding and appreciating on both sides of the aisle how this can be done. But, a good first step would be, let's just get rid of the subsidies that we currently have, $97 billion in direct subsidies and tax expenditures for oil and gas drilling and production. There's no reason why we should be subsidizing these through our tax code.
Thank you. Ahmed, over to you.
Yeah, I absolutely support putting a price on carbon, but doing that alone isn't enough in terms of how we kind of answer this question. It's not enough to meet our emission reduction goals and combat the impacts of the climate crisis. Our communities are already facing the impacts of climate change in the extreme forms as we see today with our storms, with droughts, with wildfires, and we saw recently in Southern California with flooding. And so we have to act immediately with the Green New Deal's framework to tackle the climate crisis through a comprehensive and intersectional solution. We must invest in our communities, ensure that we are creating strong paying jobs in clean energy, ensure that climate funding is reaching the front lines of our communities, and we must build an economy that prioritizes the interests of the people rather than the oil and gas industry.
Thank you. Peter D., please.
I don't know that I need a minute to answer this. Yes, we should do this. We should have done this 10 years ago. We should have done this 5 years ago. Yes, we should do it today. But what you said in the question's right, 2030. And so we, in the next 6 years, have to figure out how to mitigate the worst outcomes of climate change. We're in the window right now. When you look at, for instance, how long it takes to certify high power transmission lines, which take the power from where the solar and wind farms are to where people actually live, it's 14 years. So I think we just need to take a really hard look about what needs to be done and how to do it in with the speed and time necessary. I have a background here in streamlining innovation and overcoming bureaucracy in the government, and that really is what's needed right now to be able to do this in the window of time that we have. I'll also just say one of the best ways to do this is to get folks turning off the wells that are leaking methane, and those have been abandoned by companies. So that has to be done outside of this project as well.
Thank you. Peter O.
Yeah, so the best example of taxing carbon, I think, is California. We have cap and trade, right? It's been proven, it does work, but the issue with cap and trade is not the concept of it, but what it's used for. And I think one of the challenges we've had in California that is that out of the 10 to 12 billion per year of cap and trade, fees that the state collects, 8 billion is going to high-speed rail. And right now that high-speed rail, as opposed to commuter rail or other mass transit options that enable people to get to commute by mass transit as opposed to through cars, would be a much higher priority for those investments from cap and trade. And so I think we have to be wise about how we use those cap and trade funds.
Thank you so much. And I'm really appreciative, candidates, for your really excellent answers to each of our questions. We're coming now to question number 4. Carbon capture at the exhaust points of fossil fuels power plants, despite expensive government subsidies, has come short of its promises. Additionally, carbon removal technology, while potentially having some impact, is still in its infancy. Many people believe that we can continue burning dirty energy and emitting heat-trapping pollution because technologies like these will save us. What is your opinion? Ahmed, we'll start with you.
Yeah, in my opinion, simply we cannot continue to keep burning dirty energy. And that the idea of carbon capture, while it's not a new concept, it's a false solution to the climate crisis. We have to acknowledge its limits, its ineffectiveness, and the historical failures of carbon capture technology. Instead, we must reduce and eliminate carbon emissions in a way that centers our marginalized communities that suffer from the impacts of harmful emissions and climate change. Additionally, we must acknowledge that transportation accounts for the largest portion of greenhouse emissions in the United States. And to effectively do so, we need to continue our work to expand electric vehicle infrastructure, incentivize investments to clean energy, and continue to reject these false notions about the climate crisis. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Peter D, please.
Yeah, this is a great question. I think you've seen, I think you have the answer here in some of the biggest oil and gas producing nations that are so excited about this, as well as the oil industry. That should tell you everything that you need to know. This is an absolute red herring, and it's never going to be able to scale at the cost that we need to be able to solve this in a meaningful way. So no, given limited resources, I don't think we should continue to pour them into this technology, which is effectively a smokescreen to give license to the oil and gas industry the ability to keep on doing what they've been doing. So this is an excellent question, and we need to be smarter than falling for this.
Thank you so much. Peter O?
So I've always believed in innovation and technology, and I think we have to look at all different technologies, whether it's carbon capture or renewable power generation, and explore those and encourage that to move as quickly as possible off of fossil fuels. So I don't see why we can't keep innovating, keep encouraging it. There's always an inflection point, right? We're seeing that in EVs now, and in California, EVs are 30% of new cars sold. It's sort of plateauing a bit, but then we're going to see, I think, an inflection point of greater adoption. I think that's what technology does. And so we need to encourage all sorts of technologies to be able to get us to carbon neutrality.
Thank you so much. Sam? Oh, Sam, you're still muted. There we go.
And Zoom is headquartered in my city. Anyway, we need to be all in on a transition from fossil fuels to renewables, and greenwashing, as we're seeing so many companies benefit from with carbon capture subsidies, is not the path. We need to be spending every one of these public dollars in accelerating that transition, not subsidizing corporate America, petrochemical industry in particular, to remain mired in the past. Now, I do believe there are dollars that should be invested in R&D in universities to see how we can accelerate research on carbon capture and sequestration, to see how we can make this a viable technology, but it's not there now. And we shouldn't be subsidizing companies to remain stuck on fossil fuels as some kind of rationalization.
Thank you so much. Our fifth question: the Federal Bipartisan Infrastructure Act of 2021 and the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, in 2022 represent the largest investments in clean energy, climate resilience, carbon reduction, and climate action ever taken. What improvements or updates would you propose to these two acts to make them even more effective? Peter D, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so it was wonderful, I think, for all of us to see Biden finally get this done. I mean, this is the biggest slug of funding for effectively the Green New Deal that we were likely to see in our lifetimes. We need to be preserving this and doing everything that we can to get this out the door. So number one, we should be trying to get this out the door in case Donald Trump comes into office, because anything that is not out the door, he'll claw back. Number two here is there's another $900 billion in potential funding sitting on the sidelines in terms of private investment that could be crowded in here. So we need to make sure that we are moving in an expedited manner to make sure that these particularly small companies can access these grants and funding in an expedited timeline to be able to encourage all the rest of that funding and really that leverage to come in.
Thank you. Peter O.
Hold on, I'm trying to get off of mute there. So I don't think there's okay, can you repeat the question, please?
Yes,
I'm
absolutely.
already thinking about
It's okay. It's okay. Yeah, it's the question has to do with the Federal Bipartisan Infrastructure Act of 2021
right.
and IRA.
I got
What
it.
improvements
So
or updates?
yeah, the
and we'll
Bipartisan
restart the
Infrastructure
clock for you.
Act, I think, was a historic opportunity to build our infrastructure, particularly our mass transit infrastructure. And you know, we missed an opportunity in this district to be able to get funding for things such as Dumbarton Rail, other funding to help expand our mass transit in the area. We're reliant on a 160-year-old train line that goes only north and south. We've got to do more.
Great. Thank you so much. And we will now come to Sam.
Thank you. Yeah, I was honored to be in the Rose Garden when the infrastructure bill was signed. I think both that and the IRA have been tremendous accomplishments for this administration. It's critical, however, that we unleash not just federal government dollars, but unleash many private dollars that are available. And we've got a lot of homeowners who would love to be able to invest in rooftop solar and battery storage in their garages and to replace their gas heating with heat pumps. And even with $1,000 or $3,000 tax credit, the delta is just too high. And so we need a federally backed financing mechanism, similar to the same way that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac help first-time home buyers, veterans get into their homes. We need a mechanism that enables homeowners to be able to finance these kinds of improvements over the long run, lower interest rates. I propose one such plan on my website, samliccardo.com. It combines elements of what we call PACE, as well as what we see now with home purchasing that can help many, many homeowners and apartment owners.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Ahmed, we'll turn to you to round out this question.
Yeah, we must expand on the Justice 40 initiative to ensure that these funds actually reach the communities who disproportionately feel the impacts of climate change. And by continuing to expand access to zero emission vehicles, investing in sustainable public transit, and creating more clean energy jobs. We can also improve on this by increasing fundings to universities like Stanford right here in our district for research to develop new clean energy. And by the way, also sending funding to community colleges in our district like Foothill College to ensure that we have more accessible pathways to clean energy jobs for our most marginalized students and communities. So we have the measures right here in the district to actually help improve this. And that's what I would want to do as a congressman. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. Thank you so much for your thoughtful responses and phenomenal ideas on the table. We heard from Naomi earlier. She's now going to pose a question from the youth group within Citizens Climate Lobby. And after the candidates respond, we will turn to other questions from the audience members. Naomi?
So it is known that the negative impacts of climate change disproportionately impact lower income communities. Hence, youth activists like myself are concerned about environmental injustice. In East Palo Alto, a neighboring city where 18% live under the poverty line, residents continue to be threatened by flooding, extreme heat, and other climate risks. What policies will you enact to mitigate climate risks disproportionately felt by lower income individuals in our district? And how will you advocate for them across the nation?
Peter O., we'll start with you, and we're continuing with the 1-minute time limit.
Got it. So there are a couple of things, specifically with respect to East Palo Alto. I had the honor and privilege to, while I was on the Menlo Park City Council, to work with what's called the San Francisco Creek JPA to control flooding on the entire creek. There's a lot of work that is being done to prevent flooding into East Palo Alto, as well as Palo Alto and Menlo Park. And so I certainly support that. Having said that, there's a broader issue about access to, whether it's to different to renewable energy sources, also mass transit. I spoke about Dumbarton Rail, and affordable housing, and all of that. And that affordable housing needs to be net zero. So all
Thank
of
you.
it comes together.
Thank you. Sam?
Well, I would say that we need better and more federal partnerships with local communities that understand best how to serve communities within their cities, within their counties that are underserved. As an example, in San Jose during the pandemic, we launched what's called a Resilience Corps, providing living wage jobs to young adults who are in the lowest income census tracts to help us become a more resilient city. Everything from planting drought tolerant trees to clearing a defensible space in parts of the city that were vulnerable to wildfire, a host of other things. And this provided job pathways for dozens of those young people to get jobs at the city and the county and elsewhere. We need that kind of investment to ensure that everyone can benefit from the green dividend, and so the dollars are going to the communities that need it the most.
Thank you so much. Ahmed, we'll turn to you.
First, I'd like to say that the youth have been leading the charge on climate change for years, and I thank you for that, because you're not just fighting for your generation, you're also fighting for many of our future generations. And I would start by saying we need to pass Cori Bush's Green New Deal for cities, because it gives our communities directly the authority and the funds to solve the issues themselves by investing directly into those communities, by giving them the jobs to do so. And this is also directly connected with the Justice 40 initiative that makes sure that the money goes to the communities that where they need them the most. And so I would like to say that we have to kind of look on these issues in a way where we trust people with those issues and we invest in the people directly.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Peter D.
I just want to answer the question directly and talk about disadvantaged communities. I think too often we see that the toxic effects of pollution, or where these factories or where these dumping grounds get put, are next to communities with the least perceived political power and least voice. And frankly, that's something that my own community has dealt with. We've seen, for instance, not just Flint, Michigan with bad water, but Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, where the Marine Corps is located. Burn pits overseas, where we basically took diesel fuel and lit plastic and medical supplies and spent ammunition on fire, poisoned us, and our lungs getting brain cancer, right, at extreme rates, and the VA had abandoned us. The not-profit that I helped establish has gotten a lot of legislation passed on Capitol Hill to address this. We've kept faith with the military community in this regard. I'm running for Congress to keep faith with the rest of America.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So we'll now turn to questions from our audience members. Hillary, could you please queue up our next question from the audience?
Thank you, Neela. So the first question is, 60% of Bay Area emissions come from transportation, mostly passenger cars and light-duty trucks. What federal legislation would you propose to help the Bay Area and other similar areas reduce their transportation emissions, and how would you fund that?
Sam, we'll start with you this time.
It's not a secret. I've been a strong champion of transit, and for that reason, I've been leading or co-leading no fewer than, I believe, 4 different regional transit measures to help pay for improvements, everything from Caltrain to BART and so forth. We critically need more transit investment, that's for certain. I think we also need to be honest about the fact that because of the very suburban nature of so much of California has been built, we're going to continue to need automobiles. And I think about many communities that struggle because of lack of resources with basic mobility, and how we can launch better pilots like we did in San Jose to provide, for example, car sharing for electric cars within affordable housing complexes, for example, so that everyone can have access to green transportation, even if they cannot afford to buy a car. We need to be more creative, and we need to be more nimble.
Thank you. Ahmed, we'll turn to you.
Yeah, as we face the impacts of climate change, high-speed rail is critical to reaching our climate goals and will help connect our communities directly from Silicon Valley to San Francisco to Sacramento to LA. The economic opportunity while creating strong, good union-paying jobs here in California will help a lot. And additionally, the federal government recently announced vital investments to our high-speed rail, which will help us fund and will continue to fund some of these projects. So I would continue to expand on that. Yes, and I will continue to fight for federal investments in sustainable infrastructure and public transportation that will reduce emissions, create equitable access to economic opportunity, and protect a livable wage for every community. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter D.
Yeah, look, when I was in the Pentagon, I worked to bring tens of millions of dollars back to the district for disruptive technologies to include things like flying cars. So I could talk about that and how that will revolutionize transportation, but I'll do you one better. We shouldn't have to have cleaner solutions to commuting 2 hours in, because we shouldn't have to commute 2 hours in to be able to live in this community. And so one of the ways that I will solve housing here in the district, and one of the few ways that you can do it, is to build not just hundreds, but tens of thousands of livable units on federal land. The place to do that is Moffett Field, a place that I used to live, that's filled with falling down barracks and empty warehouses, hundreds and hundreds of acres of them, that we can put good units that are walkable. So we can have walkable communities, which we all know is actually the best way to do this from a transportation perspective. That's right with the environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter O.
So I definitely, I think, as I mentioned earlier, want to see more mass transit, more convenient mass transit available in the Bay Area. And I think I mentioned, for example, Dumbarton Rail, but all sorts of other mass transit that will encourage folks, encourage commuters to take mass transit. I also want to encourage. You had mentioned in the question about light truck sort of vehicles, which it turns out potentially there's some research that a friend of mine was telling me about yesterday, where those vehicles that, for example, contractors use to get their equipment to jobs, things like that, is about 30% of gas consumption. We've got to incentivize the conversion of those to EVs as quickly as possible to reduce our emissions.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Hillary, could you cue up our next audience question, please?
Yes, so looking at the climate policies, programs, and incentives that we have in California at the city, county, and state level, what specific policy or policies would you like to replicate at the federal level?
Ahmed, we'll start with you. Oh, you're muted.
I think California has done a lot in terms of our fighting for climate change at the state and local level that I would like to replicate at the federal level. For example, like we have a just transition to our vehicles, and we need to do that at the federal level as well. We should also take a lot of what we've done in specifically our 2040, 2030 plans and implement them at the federal level as well. But also, I think we need to go beyond that. We need to pass legislation like the Green New Deal for cities, which addresses climate change today and gives the power to our local communities to kind of keep doing that work.
Thank you so much. Peter Dixon.
Yeah, look, I'm sorry. This is such an important issue for our kids. I just think we need some frankness and some honesty in terms of how Congress actually works and what can be achieved in a bipartisan, deeply divided Congress. I'm hearing lots of great ideas here, but whoever gets to Congress from this district, unless they are able to get onto appropriations or House Armed Services, will not be in a meaningful position to implement a lot of these things. Having been a veteran, that gives me, and having gotten a lot of legislation passed on Hill, it gives me the ability to get on House Armed Services to actually get some of this stuff done using the National Defense Authorization Act, where climate change is a Pentagon priority. So I think if we're serious about dealing with the worst outcomes of climate change in the next 6 years, we owe it not just to the people of this district, but to future generations to make sure that we're being honest with how it can be done. And that requires means and methods on Capitol Hill, not just good ideas.
Thank you. Peter O.
So a couple of things that I think would be scalable and effective at the federal level. Talked about Peninsula Clean Energy and the buying collaboratives that have encouraged for us in the peninsula to be able to achieve high sources of renewable energy. The Bayren rebates that we've had. I just installed a heat pump water heater recently, and it was actually the Bayren rebates that were most helpful as opposed to the IRA rebates. And so in making it comparable, making it a good incentive. And so I'd like to see that. But it also handled things like the electrical panel upgrades that are required and are often the most expensive part of it, right? So those are all part of it. And then finally, as I mentioned at the start, incentives toward renewable power generation domestically. That's priority one.
Thank you. Sam?
In terms of what policies we should be replicating at the national level, certainly cap and trade is critical to put a price on carbon in a meaningful way. I'd also double down on community choice energy. In San Jose, we launched a CCA in 2018 to essentially take out the investor-owned utilities role in procuring electricity. We now provide 95% GHG-free electricity to 1 million residents and thousands of businesses. And we have the best carbon profile of any of the top 12 cities in the country as a result. This is really transformative, giving local communities the ability, the option to choose to be greener. We're able to do it often at a lower price than the incumbent investor-owned utility because there are financial structures that are more lean in these community choice energy approaches. So I think there's great opportunity there. And right now we're only seeing it in Massachusetts and California, a few other places.
Thank you so much. And I can relate to the incentives that are available for heat pump water heater replacement. I did the same thing myself, and with all the incentives, it was a net cost of $200 to me. So I really can't complain about that. Hillary, next question, please.
So one of the hardest things we know to get done in Congress is working across the aisle. There are some areas on climate that really impact health, specifically children's health issues with gas stoves. How would you use health or other non-traditional topics to try to build some rapport and consensus with other members of Congress to try to get something done on a climate-related issue?
Great. Peter D., we will start with you.
Yeah, this is an excellent question. And this is exactly what I was talking about, which we need to be pretty clear-eyed and steely-eyed about what you can actually get done in a divided Congress and be creative to how we get to those solutions. So with that frustration that I think we all have at a do-nothing Congress, one of the few bright spots is this organization that I co-founded, which has passed more than 150 pieces of bipartisan legislation. And so that is why I have 7 congressional endorsements, is that track record of bipartisan achievement on Capitol Hill. I'll just say here, when I look at our kids, and in 20 years, as they are thinking about what this looks like for them, we really need to be creative here in getting things done, to include, for example, taking gas out of the home where it's just not healthy. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter O.
Yeah, hi. So I'll be right up front and say I'm a climate-friendly Republican. All right. And they do exist. We do exist. And the way to work, as everyone said, Congress is half Republican, but it's not just parties. It's about that we have this, what I call the sensible middle, the moderates in the country and I think if you want to reach compromise, you have to talk about incentives rather than mandates. All the things that we've talked about in terms of incentivizing renewable sources, incentivizing the conversion to EVs, incentivizing heat pumps, all of that is much better than saying mandates, you can't do this, you can't do that. So now, health and safety can be both an incentive and a safety issue. So.
Thank you so much. Sam?
Thank you. Yeah, I think there are 2 steps that need to be taken. One is you need to find the truth tellers that the other side will listen to. In this case, for example, health authorities who can speak authoritatively about ample studies that demonstrate the severe health effects of gas on children and on occupants of homes. That was certainly a motivator for my city to be the largest city in the country to ban gas connections on new housing and commercial construction when I was mayor. That obviously, along with the environmental benefits, but it certainly helped bring more people along. They saw that there was a real concrete health benefit. Secondly, I think it's important to internalize the cost, the social cost of choosing a non-environmentally preferable option. And this is where certainly the courts can help. We can provide rights of action, for example, for class actions that force gas stove manufacturers to internalize the cost, the health costs of their products.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And we'll now turn to Ahmed for his response.
Yeah, a lot of these issues are in fact intersectional, and I think sometimes you have to identify how to speak with specific people, especially across the aisle, when addressing these issues. And the biggest thing when reaching across the aisle, especially on green energy, is our independence to making decisions for our future and our economy. Right now, we saw like what happened when Saudi Arabia decided to stop the increase of oil production, and that tremendously affected our ability in the United States in terms of from an economics perspective in prices. We cannot be dependent on Saudi Arabia. We cannot be dependent on Russia, and we should leave that dependence by leaving the framework of it. And so by leaving the framework of being dependent on those other countries and investing in clean energy is the best thing for us moving forward for Democrats and Republicans.
Thank you so much. So we'll now turn to our next audience question. Hillary?
So if you were able to get onto the committee that is going to take up the Farm Bill, and you had that as your next task, it is believed by many to be one of the most important climate legislative opportunities that is currently available. If so, how would you address the agricultural sector's ability both to cause great harm as well as the potential to draw down our GHGs?
Thanks so much. Peter O., we will start with you for this question.
All right. Well, so definitely the agricultural sector needs to go through a transformation. I think they've started with methane capture and various other ways in which in which they can reduce the effects of agriculture. You know, I'm adverse to, again, mandates. So, but to incentivize and encourage, and you know, through the technology we're seeing in terms of alternatives to meat and others that are coming along and encouraging people to demand to change and
10
shift,
seconds.
I think is the most powerful way that we can improve the agriculture industry to meet the demand.
Thank you. Sam, over to you.
Yeah, I think we need to halt ag subsidies on meat production. We need to halt ag subsidies on ethanol and a lot of biofuels, in the case of ethanol, that frankly have as bad a carbon footprint as gasoline, and just cause us to pay more when we're paying for corn every day in the stores. And it's costing us as taxpayers, in the case of ethanol and other biofuels, about $700 million a year. So I'd certainly want to cut those subsidies out. Some of the biggest subsidies are, for example, on federal leases of federal land below market rates for ranching, for example. So let's do the taxpayers a favor and the planet a favor by getting rid of some of those subsidies. I'd also like to see, you know, very favorable R&D tax credits for those who are innovating, for example, with factory generated, lab generated meats and other alternatives that are more sustainable, that can help us continue to eat burgers without actually having animals
Thank you.
themselves to them.
Ahmed, we'll turn to you.
Yeah, we must promote sustainable agriculture, including organic farming, regenerative practices, while advocating for conservation programs to protect our soil and water. And just like the oil and gas industry, we shouldn't be handing out free money through subsidies when they're promoting and many times harming our environment, specifically harming the people who are in fact working in those environments. Our agriculture industry must expand food access and equity, supporting initiatives like SNAP and measures to combat food deserts. And so we have to be innovative with how we solve these solutions. We should promote clean energy and clean practices in these areas, specifically where people are suffering from the harms of climate change, and create the infrastructure such that we can do so sustainably.
Thank you. Peter D, please.
Yeah, the IRA already has a lot in there that helps farming communities. And so there's no reason for us to duplicate some of the incentives and giveaways in terms of in terms of what we see here that's driving up the price for corn. And I'll just say this as well. I think we have 15% of rural communities that have now banned for really kind of partisan purposes solar and wind developments. And so you're seeing in some of the best areas to do this kind of a very nonsensical pushback around a lot of the things that the IRA is incentivizing. Now, 15% doesn't sound like a lot, but this is a trend that's going really in the wrong direction. I'll also just say here, actually, you know what? I think I'll save that one for the next minute that I have, since we're on the clock.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just a shout out, all of you have been really wonderful about keeping to the 1 minute, and it's meant that we've been able to take more audience questions than we originally anticipated, which is fantastic. So Hillary, next question from the audience.
Okay, you can only choose one. What do you believe is the most important piece of climate legislation that Congress could pass in 2025? And why?
Sam, you're up first on this one.
Well, the carbon dividend would be the most impactful piece of legislation. Now, I know we probably don't have the votes for that today, but the good news is there seems to be some interest on the Republican side to looking at pricing carbon in a significant way, so that it's absolutely worth every bit of our effort to start to build that coalition over many Congresses. It will take many years, I think, for us to get that over the goal line. I don't see any reason why we shouldn't devote our time to it from day one. I would certainly like to see a stronger congressional legislation to prevent the rollbacks in CAFE standards, which have really deteriorated our ability to fight the largest source of climate emissions in many of our cities, which is, of course, transportation and what's coming out of the tailpipe. And I think through stronger CAFE standards, we could certainly do far more to incentivize folks to choose cleaner transportation options.
Thank you. Ahmed?
Yeah, listen, like I think small victories are important, but we should be ambitious. We should fight for the Green New Deal, and I'll say it again and again, because that's just how impactful that framework is. We cannot take just small victories over and over again. It'll take time, but we know we are on a time limit. And in many ways, we've already passed that time limit. So the framework for the Green New Deal is important, and environmental justice is social justice, is racial justice. And we must acknowledge that, because the people who are very much facing the impacts of climate change today are those who are most vulnerable. You know, it's easy for, someone who's had a career like me, or as a lawyer, or someone else to say like, hey, this is a problem of 2030, 2045. But we have to look at it today because people are suffering.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Peter. Dixon. Yes, thank you.
I think the most impactful thing that we could do is expand opportunities for public service, specifically uniform public service. And again, that's in the Army Corps of Engineers, that's in the Uniform Public Health Corps, and that's in NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And so this is the army of people on the ground. Technology is not going to be enough. We need an army of people on the ground to deal with these climate disasters that are now occurring with regular, every 3 years. We have to stop being surprised when, for instance, here in California, we get wildfires. So right now, one of the main ways that we deal with combating wildfires, which is not only CAL FIRE, but is our prisoner population that we put on the front lines of these.
10 seconds.
CAL FIRE and that prisoner population are getting worn out. We need other ways to do this in a sustainable way.
Thank you. Peter O.
Yeah, so I'd love to see some sort of a fast track program, legislation to incentivize renewable production, as I've talked about from my first answer. I think that's really the biggest priority right now for us as a country, and I think it's important for us as a nation to focus at the federal level on the issues that we think we can incentivize, whether that's reducing the regulation and creating whether these alternative such as offshore wind power, some of these other alternatives, as well as incentivizing. I think that's would be an enormous achievement in getting us to move forward. I do think questions like, for example, ethanol and the Green New Deal, while they're admirable and appreciate your passion, are going to be incremental.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
So we have time for 3 more questions, and then this evening will be a wrap. So Hillary, next question, please.
Okay, so we have very inexpensive solar right now. And there's a real question of balance. How do we balance taking advantage of the clean and cheap solar we have versus investing in other technologies such as green hydrogen, small scale nuclear, and to a great extent offshore wind, which is still kind of a work in progress? How do you make that balance, and where would you put your chits in terms of renewable investments?
Ahmed, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think we should be very careful about nuclear and hydrogen, because we do see the impacts of those long term, and how they can be very dangerous for our communities. So I would say we should keep investing in solar. We should keep investing in wind, and we should invest in actual climate-friendly solutions and not take any shortcuts in achieving that. I think these issues are very critical, and we must do so in a manner that is sustainable. Every dollar that we spend on nuclear energy, I firmly believe this would be better spent on more affordable clean energy solutions. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Peter D.
Yeah, I disagree pretty strongly. So I think you had the Diablo Canyon project that in the 1970s people were protesting against when it was opening. You had some of those same protesters who protested against it, who, I think 2 years ago or a year ago were protesting to keep it open. So the environmental community has come a long way on this of realizing that nuclear has to be part of the solution mix if we are going to achieve the goals that we need to hit by 2030 in the next 6 years here. As part of that, the small nuclear reactors, being able to plug those into the existing grid is a key part of how we could do that. Finally, I'll just say that wind and solar has to be balanced with batteries. So as much as we can do to have breakthroughs on batteries so that we can have power, not just when it's sunny out or when the wind is blowing, is the key way to make sure that we're not using, for instance, coal-fired power plants to close that gap.
Thank you. Peter O.
Yeah, so I believe that inexpensive solar makes the most sense at the community and residential level. I mean, that, through programs, in fact, I think Mayor Liccardo talked about PACE, right? PACE is a great program to incentivize residents to get solar, right? I think it makes a lot of sense at the residential level. But wind power, offshore wind, domestic, whatever, these other sources also geothermal also makes sense when we're talking about power generation, and we should look at all of that. And I'll mention nuclear is in my opinion, is a stopgap. We need to, as we're transitioning to other more desirable renewable sources, we may need to retain nuclear for some period of time. I'm not a believer in small nuclear, but just keep it and then transition.
Thank you so much. Sam?
Well, certainly the march of technology will ultimately pick the winners and losers in all that debate about which sources generation will be best. But I'd say my answer would be in terms of where government resources should go, in terms of R&D and trying to incentivize investment. I'd say none of the above. It would all be in battery storage. We know that wind and solar right now are the most available sources out there. And the intermittency is a real issue, and we need a much more reliable grid, as we all know over the last couple of days, and we've seen the power outages. If we had ways to incentivize our own homeowners and apartment owners investing in their own battery storage in their garages, we would see a more reliable grid, and we'd see more transition to renewables, because we know that is such a critical element of all of this. We've got to get people comfortable moving from gas to the grid.
Thank you so much. Hillary, next question, please.
So EVs are great. We all love them, but public transit, walking, and biking are pretty darn important too. What could we do at the federal level to incentivize other forms of green transportation and making our neighborhoods and at the city level safer and more equitable and just generally more pleasant to be in?
Peter D., you'll lead this one off, please.
I mentioned this earlier, but I think it's worth saying again, because housing is such a pressing issue for this community. And I think we have nibbled around the edges of solving it, but we have not solved it in a meaningful way for our community. It's gutting our local economy. At age 40, I'm seeing increasingly my friends moving to Austin, Texas, or other places because they're finally recognizing that they'll never achieve the dream of home ownership here. And so being able to, at a federal level, build a community, we see the ability to do that here on Moffett Field, which is why I have a team as part of my campaign focused on building out a plan on exactly how to do that. Again, not for hundreds of units, but for tens of thousands of units. All of that will be walkable. So I'm extremely proud to be releasing that plan to the community.
Thank you. Peter O.
So to follow up on that. One of the things that I'm proud of is the 550 acres in our Baylands area of Menlo Park, which was light warehouse and empty warehouses. We rezoned to be what's called live, work, play, right? A combination of housing units, retail, and also labs and innovation, so that in effect it encourages those employees to live right near their work, and to shop right near their work, and to go to restaurants right near their work, so to reduce their carbon footprints and the need for commuting. And that was 4,500 units of housing as well as office space. I think that's a big part of it. Mass transit is the other that I've spoken a couple of times about.
Thank you. Sam?
Well, a lot comes in the conditions that are attached to federal funding and ensuring that there are complete streets policies that are very strong, that, for example, may emphasize road diets, as we've implemented in many places in San Jose, to get more bike lanes out there. It's not just about the bikes, although I'm certainly a very active cyclist and I enjoy the bike lanes like many others do, but it's really about narrowing the roads so that drivers are moving slower, so pedestrians have a better chance of getting across the street, so that people feel safer. And we actually have seen the real impacts of reducing auto-related injuries as a result of some of these road diets. It also means, let's stop having federal government subsidize roadway expansions that simply induce more sprawl. When I was able to lead ballot measures, for example, to protect Coyote Valley and thousands of hundreds of acres against development, one of the key things we had to do was stop infrastructure development in places where we knew we didn't want to see sprawling.
Thank you. Ahmed?
Yeah, while EVs play a role in reducing emissions, we need to take a more comprehensive approach to address our transportation-related climate challenges. And this would include investing in more robust, affordable, and accessible public transportation systems like buses, trains, light rail, and ensuring that everyone can rely on clean and efficient mobility options to connect them to affordable housing. So we increase the housing supply in areas and create more walkable cities when we do so. So we should have to take a holistic approach to equity, to affordability, and to the environmental impact, so that we can create a more sustainable future. And so all of these things are interconnected and interrelated, addressing housing, transportation, and climate change. And that's what we need to do day one.
Thank you. Hillary, our last question from the audience, please.
All right. So the EPA has been critical to what California has been able to do to reduce pollution in our state. What changes, big magic wand time, what changes would you like to see in the EPA's mandate or how they operate to make it even more effective as we need to accelerate our efforts to reduce pollution and greenhouse gases in our country?
Thank you. Peter, can you get us started, please?
So I certainly encourage and applaud the EPA's work about making sure we have everything from clean water and reduce emissions and all of that, which is part of its existing mandate. And it would certainly not roll it back like Trump or others might be doing. But certainly encourage and make sure that its mission can be continued and successful. But it's more than just the EPA. We've talked about it all this evening. It's about incentives and ways in which, whether it's the tax structure or whether it's federal funding, where we can encourage and achieve getting to both renewable sources as well as
Thank
okay.
you. Thank you
that.
so much, Peter.
Yeah.
Sam, over to you.
Yeah, I like to see an EPA that looks a lot more like CARB. We've had a lot of legal battles in recent years over the jurisdiction of EPA and whether or not it can regulate, for example, greenhouse gas emissions, and whether or not the congressional authorization included GHG. I think clearly it must and should, and need an EPA that is robust, that's able to work within market mechanisms that can actually really change economic behavior in a significant way, as CARB has.
Thank you so much. Ahmed, over to you, please. Oh, Ahmed, you're muted.
Sorry. The EPA's new rules on harmful emissions are a critical step for us to build a clean energy future for our communities, but we can't stop there. So my vision for the EPA revolves around accountability, justice, and proactive measures to protect our environment and to combat pollution. We must have a robust enforcement of environmental regulations, ensuring that corporate polluters are held accountable for their actions and the harm that they cause to our air, our water, and our communities. And we saw with the Ohio train derailment and in Flint, Michigan, how corporate polluters being held accountable is absolutely necessary. And so that is that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Peter D.
Yeah, so I think the Environmental Protection Agency needs to make sure that they are frankly working with a lot of community organizations and groups as a matter of self-protection, because the courts have been weaponized by Republicans to try and dramatically reduce the ability of the EPA to do its job. Likewise, just as we saw with the last Trump administration, they had to put all of their records, their climate change data, things all out to the community so that the Trump administration wouldn't go in and just erase it all. That will need to be done again. In terms of collaboration, that actually brings me to something else that I want to talk about in closing, which is none of us are solely the climate candidate. Actually, Joby Bernstein is. And so even though we're all running against each other, it's really important that we figure out how to get things done together. With Joby, we are collaborating on a climate paper, and I'll release it on each of our websites, dixonforcongress.com.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Candidates, thank you so much. That was lots of audience questions, and our audience has been fantastic with providing excellent questions. We weren't able to accommodate all of them, if you can believe that. And so we will be consolidating the remaining questions and send them out to all of the candidates. Candidates will have a week then to respond in writing, and the answers will be shared with audience members who registered for one or both of the forums. Thank you again. I believe that climate is the most pressing issue of our time. I understand that there are other issues, but for habitability on our planet, this is number one. So it was wonderful to hear from all of you, your ideas, potential solutions, and ways forward. And our audience really appreciate your willingness to spend the evening with the candidates, listening, processing, and being able to make an informed decision. Naomi, could you close us out?
Thank you all for attending, candidates for participating, Dr. Patel and our co-sponsors, 350 Silicon Valley, Thrive Alliance, Sustainable San Mateo County, Actera, Greentown Los Altos, and Sustainable Silicon Valley. So on your screen, you will find a QR code to sign up for a 2-minute call to action sign up, a link to Citizens Climate Lobby's 2024 California Regional Conference at Menlo Atherton High School on April 6th and 7th, mark your calendar, and a link to join your local Citizen Climate Lobby chapter. Please consider joining one of us or our sponsors working to bring about a rapid, just transition to a carbon emission-free economy. Get your phones ready, and we will leave this screen up for a few minutes after the meeting. Take a few seconds to scan our QR codes and start taking action. In 3 to 4 days, we will also send an email with a published link for tonight's recording, among other resources. So any friends or family who could not attend can catch up later with our panel. Lastly, and most importantly, remember to vote in the March 5th primary. Thank you so much again, and have an amazing evening.
Thank you. Great to be with you.